At present, most leftists allege that the Great Depression was occasioned by inherent flaws of capitalism.
I think we had quite enough capitalism in the last 8 years. I think we need some regulation now.
However, in the 1920s the American economy was hardly free of government intervention. Indeed, government intrusion into the market both caused and prolonged the debacle. The Federal Reserve, an institution desired by progressives, especially such financiers as J.P. Morgan who supported the American Communist Party, brought about the partly artificial boom of the 1920s through inflationary monetary policies, yet Keynesians and open communists alike never attribute the Great Depression to this ignominious organization. In addition, further government interference in the economy after the crash of 1929 worsened the recession considerably, as the Great Depression permitted the rise of various forms of socialism, including German and Italian fascisms, which were far-left ideologies contrary to the claims of revisionist leftists. It is probable that the recession was planned by ignominious men desiring a one-world socialist empire and the murder of innocents alike. Therefore, leftist economic policies brought about the Great Depression, which was likely desired by radical socialists for singularly immoral reasons. Before the Great Depression, America had experienced many recessions of varying severity, nearly all of which were due to the interference of national banks. From 1920 to 1921, America suffered a severe commerce recession. Hoover attempted to utilize government intervention to end the downturn. President Harding permitted wage rates to fall while reducing government spending and taxes. The Depression ended by 1921. Lamentably, in 1921 the Federal Reserve again adopted inflationary monetary policies. The Federal Reserve augmented the supply of money by 61.8% from 1921 to 1929 through the creation of a variety of money substitutes, the products of credit expansion, inflation, the increase in the supply of money not compensated by an equal rise in the supply of gold, thus averaged 7.7% annually, as it does today. In order to affect inflation, the Federal Reserve purchased bonds and other assets from banks. The organization then paid the banks with money conjured from thin air. Banks thus were granted additional reserves without a compensating increase in the supply of commodities of value. The Federal Reserve also exacerbated inflation by decreasing deflationary assets and increasing inflationary assets. As Murray Rothbard explains, such inflationary policies by the Socialist Federal Reserve occasioned the business cycle of the 1920s. In the economy, whilst some money was spent in consumption of various goods, the remainder was saved and invested, as it is today. The degree to which people preferred present to future satisfactions determined the amount of money invested rather than spent in immediate purchases. As the money supply was inflated, it appeared as if additional real capital, the result of increased productivity, existed. Businesses invested in long-term projects that had the potential to yield a greater profit than did those closer to the consumer. As sufficient resources did not exist to complete them, the projects failed. Furthermore, such cheap money induced artificial speculation and increases in prices. Finally, fractional reserve banking, facilitated by the Federal Reserve Act, permitted banks to lend far more money than they possessed in balances, thus exponentially increasing the inflation instigated by the Federal Reserve. Without the interference of such a government-sponsored institution, banks would have no incentive to issue bad loans, for such actions would likely cost them a great deal. President Hoover, a former Democrat admired by such leftists as the editor of The New Republic, pursued left-wing economic policies that worsened the recession. Had he followed Harding's example, it is likely that the recession of 1929 would have ended within 2 years, according to Rothbard. Hoover attempted to prevent wage rates in many industries from falling, as they must to ensure a quick recovery, through the threat of regulation. In addition, the Federal Reserve resumed inflation of the money supply, adding nearly $300 million to banks' reserves in but a week after the crash. Stock prices thus artificially rose somewhat. Finally, Hoover's foolish public works programs and augmented tax rates worsened the recession, rendering it a depression. One is thus inclined to wonder why the government pursued policies destined to occasion financial ruin. Mere incompetence cannot suffice, for great economic minds, such as the advocate of the free market Ludwig von Mises, warned that the partly artificial prosperity of the 1920s could not be sustained, as socialism is inherently inefficient. One of the most zealous advocates of the above considered institution, John Rockefeller, was an internationalist who funded revolutionary movements throughout the world. David Rockefeller, who shares his ignominious beliefs, states that we are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right crisis. Similarly, socialists like Hillary Clinton believe that crises may be utilized to impose their communist ideas.
Excited by this opportunity. I'm very well aware that we are not yet through this economic crisis, but we have the chief of staff for President Obama is an old friend of mine and my husband's, and was in the White House when Bill was there, and he said, never waste a good crisis.
Various socialists, including H.G. Wells, were fascinated by both fascism and Nazism, which were left-wing ideologies. Wells claimed that I am asking for liberal fascisti, for enlightened Nazis. Thus, it is probable that the Great Depression was occasioned in order to bring about socialism worldwide. Although fortunately the schemes of such leftists have not yet succeeded, America and Israel, nations that are the last bastions of morality in the world, are threatened by ignorance and immorality, a lamentable condition that may permit the evil plans of the conspirators to be realized.